Welcome to Marrow Masters Season 13, brought to you by the National Bone Marrow Transplant Link and sponsored by Sanofi. The NBMT Link, established in 1992, strives to help patients, caregivers, and families cope with the psychosocial challenges of bone marrow and stem cell transplant, from diagnosis through survivorship. This season, we'll be focusing on the side effects of bone marrow and stem cell transplant, including GVHD. Here's your host, Executive Director of the NBMT Link, Peggy Burkhardt.
Welcome, everyone. Today we have with us Heather Knutson of the Leukemia and Lymphoma Society. So Heather is a registered dietitian who is going to share her vast knowledge with us today, considering all things nutrition post-transplant. And she's also going to tell you about the very wonderful program that LLS has in place for survivors and their families. Welcome, Heather. How are you today?
Thank you so much, Peggy. I am well today. Thank you for asking. And I'm honored for the invitation and to be here with you talking about nutrition and making that transition home with graft versus host just a little bit easier.
Let's jump right in, Heather. Let's discuss when someone gets home and they're getting settled in. And let's talk about the caregiver right out of the gates. Because a lot of this, let's face it, it falls on the caregiver. Everybody's home now and it's a brand new chapter. Let's talk about the role of the survivor and the caregiver when they first get home.
Yeah, and that's such a big transition for both people, right? Like the caregiver hasn't been maybe living with their spouse or friend, and there's so many different things that need to be done that maybe weren't part of their routine before. Some of the more obvious things that caregivers can really play a key role in with nutrition is shopping before they come home.
Mm-hmm.
And I often advise caregivers and patients to use what they were eating and tolerating in the hospital as a starting point for when they go home. And that gives some clues as to what kinds of foods they might tolerate at home, whether it's things like going to the grocery store, stocking the house, maybe cooking some meals that they can freeze in individual portions to be able to take out.
Keep it easy, right?
Oh, easy and simple are the best ways. Snacks, having snacks readily available, sometimes even having them, by the patient's favorite chair on the kitchen counter, places where they're visible or kind of like front and center in the fridge, I always think is a great place. So when you open the fridge, you see them right there. You don't have to think too much about it.
Yeah, and you're making me think about how fatigued new survivors are too, even just having things ready, an apple that can be sliced up, or maybe it's even sliced up already, just because we hear about how bad the fatigue can be, and why not make it as easy as possible to get nutrition going for the survivor and the family?
Yeah, and fatigue, goodness, is ubiquitous amongst cancer treatments. And that's certainly going to be something most everybody struggles with.
Yes, for sure.
Having those ready-to-eat foods, like you mentioned, those pre-cut fruits, as long as people are washing them at home.
Mm-hmm.
Things that are grab and go, like I always think like yogurt, cottage cheese sticks, simple things like peanut butter toast or crackers and cheese that can just kind of be grabbed. You don't have to spend effort preparing them.
Absolutely. Let's talk about the relationship with the caregiver. Does it seem to change a little bit once they get home?
Yes. And that can be something that a lot of people are unprepared for. You transition from this place where when you're in the hospital, nurses and the hospital staff are reminding you to eat and drink and take your meds. And you have to think about it, but not really.
Mm-hmm.
And when you go home, the responsibility is all of a sudden entirely yours and your caregivers. And it can create quite a strain on a relationship between the caregiver and the patient. Sometimes caregivers might appear to the patient like they are nagging or, we have to eat how many times a day? So they're asking over and over and over again, like, would you want this? Do you want this? Are you hungry?
Yes.
And the caregiver means it out of love. And, they are trying their best to provide that care. But sometimes, that can create quite that strain, right? Like, for example, if it's your spouse, like they're still your spouse, but they're your caregiver. And so it can be so helpful taking the time before you're discharged to think about, like, how are we going to navigate this at home?
Mm-hmm.
For some people, it can be really helpful to define with their caregiver, like, how do you want to be asked?
Sure.
It might be helpful to decide, like, okay, we're going to set alarms on your cell phone or the microwave or your computer as reminders to eat. So maybe the caregiver doesn't feel like they have to ask continuously. Or for some people, it might be helpful if the caregiver picks what to eat and just prepares it and offers it.
So true.
Yeah.
And you don't want to feel like someone's parent when you're their spouse,
Mm-hmm.
and we know when you're a caregiver, you are that person's everything. But I would imagine being the spouse gets lost for a little bit. And like you said, with the nagging. So these are great things to remember.
Yeah. So that's a wonderful thing that you can talk through while you're still in the hospital and kind of set those pieces up. Maybe it's going through the med list that you'll have when you go home, setting alarms. Another tool that we have at LLS is called a Health Manager app.
Okay.
You can link a caregiver account with the patient account. And there's all kinds of different things you can do with it. But in this context, you can note what you had to eat when you took your medications. You can both add things to a collective grocery list. And so I have had people use that to, note their medications or when they ate in there. So it's their caregiver then maybe doesn't need to ask them. But it can help make those tasks a little bit easier.
Oh, I love that. And, we'll make sure we include that in the show notes so that folks can click on that or, go to your site and find it. That's a wonderful service. Terrific. So, Heather, let's talk about some of the most common things you hear from new survivors, what they wish they knew before getting home.
Yeah. So one of the biggest things I hear that people are really surprised about is how much nutrition that they need after their transplant. And on top of that, when you're discharged home, you might not be eating 100% of the foods that you need or be able to tolerate all the foods that you would like to. Kind of for an example, a 160-pound adult typically might need about 65 grams of protein a day.
Okay.
But after transplant, by the time they get home, they might need upwards of 110 to 145 grams of protein a day.
Oh, wow. That's a big difference.
Yeah, it is a significant difference. And so, mentally kind of planning ahead for how you're going to navigate that. What kind of meal pattern might you have? We talked a little bit about having snacks in convenient locations, even keeping snacks in things like your car, when you're going back to work, having them at work, when you are preparing for transplant ahead of time. If you make a large pot of soup and hey, we're not going to eat all this right now, freeze some in individual portions so you have those things prepared. It can also be helpful to find a nutrition drink before your transplant that you like. It's oftentimes easier to consume more calories through liquid nutrition than it is through solid food.
Okay.
Or sometimes when you, just don't feel like eating.
Yes.
You can, grab one of those. It's hydration and nutrition all in one. Some popular brands are like Boost or Ensure, but there are so many different options on the market. And so trying a few out, finding one that you can tolerate is a helpful thing to do leading into transplant.
Awesome. So would protein, like whey protein or additional protein in those shakes be an idea?
Definitely it can be.
Okay.
And so that's a little bit more labor intensive, right? But something that the caregiver could help with. There are a lot of different recipes for different protein shakes, or even adding something like whey protein to some milk or water can be a quick and easy option as well.
Very good. Okay. So let's talk about what exactly you advise people to eat more of post-transplant when they're home.
Yeah. So we really look and encourage optimal nutrition. So encouraging balanced meals. And so that might look like some combination of a good protein source, whether that's meat, fish, eggs, beans, tofu, a carbohydrate, so some kind of grain, pasta, rice, potatoes, yogurt, fruit, and vegetables. And that's kind of our like ultimate end goal. Is that reality for everybody when they get home from the hospital? Probably not. And so aiming to get as close to that as you can
Sure.
is what we're really looking for.
Yep.
When you are able, eating more foods that come from plants.
Uh-huh.
So those things like grains, beans, fruits, vegetables is really helpful for your body. And know that when people are experiencing things like bowel changes, whether it's constipation or diarrhea, we do have to shift those things a little bit, and that's okay.
Absolutely.
And needed at that time.
Sure.
One of the things that we really encourage for fast recovery is not losing weight through that recovery period. And so that's really kind of code for we don't want you to lose muscle mass. And so making sure that you are eating enough to maintain your weight the best that you can.
Yep.
After you get home.
I've heard that it's even hard for people. Their whole lives, we all try to lose weight, right? So here someone comes home and they're losing weight like crazy and they just need more and more calories. And that becomes the challenge.
Yeah. And that's so challenging, right? It's like this complete mental shift for people, especially with the pressure our society puts on weight loss and eating less calories.
Mm-hmm.
And so I really encourage people to kind of, if they have continued goals for losing weight, to maybe take those goals and don't forget about them, but maybe stick them on the shelf for a moment and focus this time on really nourishing yourself well and giving your body what it needs. And think about that as, part of your treatment.
Yes.
And, when you have healed and you're down the road, it might absolutely be appropriate to kind of take those goals back on the shelf and continue to pursue that weight loss.
Yes. That healthy weight.
Yes, exactly.
That everyone strives for. What about friends and family wanting to bring, food to the family that just went through the transplant? Any suggestions on easy things to provide?
Yeah. So, that can be a really tricky piece. When people are discharged from the hospital, oftentimes, blood cell counts are still low. It is still important to follow those food safety guidelines. And so sometimes it can be helpful for others to teach maybe some close friends about food safety so they know the food that they're bringing is safe for them to consume. I have had people maybe use something like a meal trainer, accept meals from friends and families or members of their church for the caregivers or children or their spouse. And that, takes one thing off their to-do list because, the patient might not be eating the same food or tolerating the same things as their children might be.
Yes.
I have had people who have had a meal train for grocery gift cards.
Oh, interesting.
Specifically at grocery stores that offer grocery delivery.
That's a great idea. Yeah.
Another thing, a lot of times people just want to help and they don't know how. Food is one way that we can oftentimes show love in our culture. But, maybe asking for help for other things that you need help with.
Mm-hmm.
And I always think specifically things that don't maybe have a set time, like things maybe like watering your plants or mowing your lawn or taking your dog for a walk.
Yes.
Or maybe another parent picking kids up or, whatever it is that you have in your life, sometimes taking other tasks off your list can be helpful as well and help other people to, show their love and help out.
I love that. And, even giving the caregiver a break. I recently read a fantastic book, a multiple myeloma patient wrote it. His name's Greg Proctor. And what really struck me, one of the parts in the book, his best friend showed up and said to Greg's wife, Monica, you go out for the day. Don't worry about us. You just go get a break. I'm going to handle everything here. And you just take a day for yourself. And, the survivor gets to hang out with his buddy. It's new conversation. The caregiver gets to even maybe go take a nap. There's so many ways to help the family, and it doesn't always have to just be food.
Yes. Oh, I love that idea. That's fantastic.
Hope we're offering lots of great tips here for folks. So, Heather, let's talk about, fresh berries and salad and lettuce. I know this is a touchy one because these things just need to be a certain way. They need to be cleaned appropriately. Any tips on that?
Yeah, so it is important to continue to follow those guidelines when you come home from a transplant until the point that your neutrophil counts have come back up and your doctor gives you that okay to eat those other foods.
Okay.
I know Sue Hill, the dietitian that was in an episode last season of Marrow Masters, talked a lot about the details of food safety.
Yes, she did. Thank you.
Yeah, and so that's a great episode to reference, but definitely continue to wash that fresh produce really well, cook meat all the way through, avoid sprouts and unpasteurized cheese. And, be mindful of leftovers 4 days in the fridge.
Oh, that's such a good point. I'm so glad you said that, Heather. And we will be sure to put a link to that episode in our show notes. Okay, so moving on, let's talk about graft versus host disease. It's such a tough thing. Any nutritional considerations when it comes to graft versus host disease?
Yeah. And, there's such a wide variety of different ways people experience graft versus host. And so it is kind of a very unique and individualized interventions that we use. Almost everything, from a nutrition perspective, includes, in some context, eating several small meals throughout the day. And that's always overwhelming when I say it like that. We think like, oh my gosh, I have to cook 5 meals. What? But maybe reframing it and thinking like 3 smaller meals and 2 to 3 snacks in between each meal.
Why is that with the GVHD? Can you explain why the extra food?
Yeah. So oftentimes calorie needs are elevated with that, additional stress on your body. A lot of the side effects, fatigue is probably present if you're experiencing anything like diarrhea, loss of appetite, constipation, mouth sores, sore throat, difficulty swallowing, hard time preparing food, or, it's our skin and eating is challenging. Eating little bits more frequently is kind of one of those universal things that is part of the recommendations for each and every one of those pieces.
Well, thank you. And I know I've heard patients say that when they have graft versus host disease, they cannot seem to gain weight. So I don't know if their metabolism just speeds up while the, graft versus host disease is going on. But I do recall several of our survivors sharing that. So more important than ever to have those snacks handy and easy to grab for sure. Heather, let's talk about supplements. It's always an interesting subject. Are there supplements that can strengthen the immune system?
Oh, goodness. Yes, we get this question all the time. Short answer is no. There's no one supplement that can, give you more immunity or, bring up your platelets or your blood cell count. It kind of all comes back to aiming for good, balanced nutrition.
Okay.
And so, when we get this question, a couple of the things that I do first is number 1, make sure they're consuming enough calories to support their weight. If we're not eating enough, our body is kind of in a state of breakdown, which is not great for our immune system. So that's kind of step 1. The second thing I do is make sure they're getting enough protein. Another key piece of supporting our immunity through food. Then look, are there ways that we can increase the variety of the foods that they're eating? It really takes that diversity or variety of foods to get in that well-rounded amounts of vitamins and minerals and nutrients from food.
Okay, so really supplements are not something that LLS really promotes. It's more through food, well-balanced meals. What about vitamins?
Yeah, so there might be times that you do have either a true deficiency or, your treatment regimen includes taking a supplement that they know is helpful through that. So when your doctor orders a supplement, it is important to take that as directed. There can be times that supplements are helpful. I would encourage people to do so under the guidance of their healthcare team. Like one example, probiotic supplements. Gut health is all over the news. We are hearing about it. Food companies are advertising it on packaging. We know now that probiotic supplements specifically, so not the kind you would get by eating yogurt, but the kind that come in a little capsule, are usually not helpful and possibly harmful to people, especially in that post-transplant acute phase. So definitely, when your immune system is compromised and you're taking some really serious medications, always have that conversation either with your doctor or dietitian before taking those things.
Okay, well, thank you for that. There is a lot of nutrition information on the internet, and every day it changes. One day you can drink coffee, the next day you can't. One day you can have a glass of red wine, the next day you can't. It's definitely contradictory. Where do you suggest people find those trustworthy nutrition tips?
Yeah. So, whenever somebody tells me that their neighbor told them something, they read something on the internet, I always encourage them to validate it from a trusted source that is evidence-based. And so websites that end in either .gov, .org, or .edu are generally good places to start. If you can find that information on those sites, you know that is true evidence-based information. I think there's a lot misunderstood about science too. We don't make recommendations based off of one study. And I find, like, watching the news, they'll report on single studies, or you'll see something pop up on Facebook about a study.
Yes. And
that's great information, but it's not the only information we have on that subject. And so it is important to look at those sites. I know the LLSnutrition.org website touches on a lot of hot topics, side effects, different information. So that's another great site to check if you're trying to validate something that you heard.
Absolutely. We can't say enough about our friends at LLS and the great job that they do. Okay. So Heather, let's get back to GVHD for a minute. Were there any other side effects that you wanted to cover today?
Yeah. So we talked a little bit about weight loss. We have a lot of people who call for our nutrition consults at LLS who are really struggling with things like diarrhea or constipation. And in both of these, I would say diarrhea and constipation, really important that you are drinking enough fluid throughout the day.
Mm-hmm.
And talking to your dietitian or your doctor is a really great place to find out what your fluid goals are. We commonly hear drink 8-ounce glasses of water every day. And the truth is that there are a lot of people that need more fluid than that.
Sometimes that alone would be tough to get down. So imagine needing more than that.
Yeah. And that's a good point. When you are struggling just to drink, combining nutrition and fluid intake in one, with things like protein shakes or smoothies or, ice cream shakes. It can be fun every once in a while.
Uh-huh.
That can help to kind of hit both of those pieces.
Absolutely.
Speaking of protein shakes, they can be so very expensive. A couple things that can help with that. There is a milk on the market, and I'm not sponsored by them, but the brand name is Fair Life.
Oh, okay. I don't know about this.
Yeah. They have a little image of a cow on the front of their packaging.
Okay.
And it is regular cow's milk processed in a different way so that, number one, there's no lactose in it, which often is challenging for people to digest when they are experiencing things like diarrhea.
Okay.
But in that process, it also results in a higher protein content.
Huh.
And don't quote me on this, but I believe it's around 13 grams, which is very comparable to things like, Ensure or Boost.
Mm-hmm.
They have a whole milk variety. They make a chocolate milk.
Oh, wow. We will include something about that in the show notes as well.
Yeah. And, sometimes I feel like that could be another good fit for people who maybe the vitamin taste of supplements is bothering them,
Mm-hmm.
in something like a Boost or Ensure. Other economical ideas like carnation instant breakfast.
Uh-huh.
Anecdotally, is people tell me they usually tolerate it pretty well and doesn't maybe have such a strong vitamin taste. You can make a protein drink using a cup of whole milk and blending that with a 1/4 cup of dry milk powder.
Okay.
And flavoring it either with like an ice cream syrup or flavored coffee syrup, whatever you want it to taste like, or using it to make a cream-based soup.
Wow.
And that can help to save a lot of money and squeeze some extra calories and protein in there as well.
My boys both played hockey, and I would buy boxes and boxes of carnation instant breakfast because they couldn't gain a pound during those years.
Yeah.
It was a staple at our house, and they loved it. So I know that is pretty tasty.
Mm-hmm. That it is.
So Heather, what foods can people eat to improve their platelets, their white blood cells, their neutrophil counts?
And that really comes back to that adequate nutrition.
Okay.
And so, getting a good variety of foods in is important, getting enough protein in, enough calories.
It comes down to a balanced diet.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. When it comes to things like supplements, their marketing is genius and they make a lot of different claims. But it is important to remember that supplements do not do the same thing as whole food does. Whole food has fiber, it has, phytochemicals, those good plant chemicals that do good things in our body, antioxidants. And a lot of those components we're finding work better together. And so, it's not the same to isolate one piece of that out into a supplement, as easy as that would be, just to take something to improve that.
Sure.
Science tells us that it's not the same and does not work the same as eating food.
Absolutely. Oh, this has been so great, Heather. As we get ready to wrap things up, maybe you could let folks know a little bit more about what LLS offers, if there's anything you missed or anything you might want to still cover.
Yeah. So at the Leukemia and Lymphoma Society, we provide free one-on-one telephone consults to patients or caregivers of all cancer types. And they're really based around what the needs of the patients are. We talk a lot about managing side effects with food, meal planning, answering questions that people have heard, and help making a plan that is individual for that person. And that's a really unique service that I was really surprised by and very, very cool.
Oh, it sure is. Now, do you work on that stuff too, or?
Yes. Yep. We have an amazing team and 2 registered dietitians.
Awesome.
We have a very full schedule. You can schedule online. And the website is llsnutrition.org.
Great.
Or there's a phone number that you could also call, 877-467-1936 to schedule.
That is fantastic. Well, Heather, thank you so much. We really enjoyed having you, and you just reminded us all of what we should be doing. And I know this is going to help so many survivors and their families when they're getting back home and getting ready to live their best life. So thank you.
And thank you, Peggy, and the National Bone Marrow Transplant Link for the opportunity to join you on the podcast today. And I hope others can hear this information and are inspired to find new ways that nutrition can help them.
Very good. Thank you.
This has been the Marrow Masters Podcast. If you know someone who would benefit from the information in our show, please share this episode with them. And don't miss future episodes of our show. Follow Marrow Masters for free on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube, or wherever you're listening right now. And to connect with the National Bone Marrow Transplant Link, visit nbmtlink.org or tap the link in our show notes.